Riley Keough furious at Priscilla for not telling the truth. Graceland was quieter than usual. No tour groups, no photographers, just the sound of wind brushing against the trees outside. Riley Keough stood alone in the hallway she used to run through as a child, but now the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. Lisa Marie was gone, and with her passing, a door had been opened. Not the upstairs one Graceland fans obsessed over, but something deeper. A door Riley had never wanted to open, one that led to questions about family, about loyalty, and about who she could really trust. Growing up, Riley never saw Graceland as a monument. To her, it was a memory machine, one that sometimes felt magical, and sometimes suffocating. She didn't inherit just a house. She inherited everything that came with the Presley name. Decades of fame, unfinished stories, and secrets that didn't make it into the official biographies. Everyone on the outside saw it as a gift, but for Riley it often felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, and people guarding the corners of that puzzle a little too closely. When Lisa Marie passed, Riley was thrust into a role she hadn't prepared for. Not emotionally, not legally, not in any way. Suddenly she wasn't just grieving her mother, she was being asked to lead the Presley legacy, both as its face and as its protector. And just when she was trying to make sense of it all, the first blow landed. A legal filing. Priscilla Presley, her own grandmother, was challenging the trust Lisa Marie had amended back in 2016, one that gave Riley full control of the estate. The headlines painted it as a family dispute over money, but behind the scenes it cut much deeper. For Riley, it wasn't about finances or power, it was about truth, about the idea that somewhere along the line her family stopped being honest with one another, that love had been replaced with control, and that her mother's final wishes were now up for debate by someone Riley thought she could always count on. Behind closed doors, things got colder. Riley was shocked, hurt, and for the first time, furious. Not just because of the legal maneuvering, but because she started finding pieces of a story she had never been told. One afternoon, in a drawer Lisa used to keep locked, Riley found handwritten letters, notes, personal thoughts. Some were from Lisa Marie, some from Elvis. But the real shock was in what they implied, that Priscilla may have knowingly kept things from Lisa and Riley, things that could have changed everything. One note in particular was folded tightly, its edges worn. It read, "I know she won't tell you, but I hope one day you'll find this." There was no signature, but the message hit hard. There were mentions of conversations Riley had no memory of, agreements made without Lisa's consent, decisions about Graceland that contradicted everything Riley had been led to believe. It wasn't just a private betrayal, it was a manipulation of legacy itself. And suddenly everything made sense. The guarded way her mother used to speak about the estate, the moments where Lisa would pause mid-sentence and change the subject, the hesitation Riley always felt but never questioned. Because when you grow up in a family like the Presleys, you're taught that silence is tradition, that privacy matters more than pain, that secrets are safer left untouched, until they're not. Riley could feel it bubbling inside her. Not just anger, but grief that had nowhere to go. She had lost her mother, and now she was starting to realize she may have never truly known her at all, because the one person who had all the answers, the one who had the chance to come forward, chose not to. Priscilla didn't just challenge the trust, she challenged Riley's right to the truth, to her mother's voice, and to her own future as a Presley. It was in that moment, surrounded by papers, echoes, and a silence that now felt hostile, that Riley made a choice. She wouldn't protect the version of the story others had written for her. She would tell the truth, even if it hurt, even if it meant breaking from family tradition. Because some legacies are built on music and fame, others are built on silence, and Riley had seen what silence could do to a family. So here's the question we're all left with. What would you do if the people meant to protect the truth buried it instead? Riley didn't go upstairs to feel nostalgic. She didn't climb those creaking stairs to cry or even to remember. She went to the second floor of Graceland for one reason: to look for answers. And for the first time, she wasn't just grieving a mother. She was investigating a history that had been carefully guarded and maybe even rewritten. The second floor had always been off-limits, even to her. It was the sacred space where Elvis lived out his final years and where he took his final breath. But now, with Lisa gone, the keys were in Riley's hands. It didn't feel like power. It felt like permission. Permission to see what had been hidden. Permission to question what had always been accepted. She moved slowly, remembering every warning she'd been given as a child. Don't touch that. Don't open that door. That room isn't for you. But this time there was no one to stop her. She passed Elvis's bedroom, still exactly as it had been. The air was thick with a strange mix of his cologne and time itself, but it wasn't the bedroom that held the answers. It was a narrow, dimly lit room tucked near the end of the hall, a study Riley barely remembered. Inside, she found a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn, its pages yellowed. It was Elvis's journal. But not the kind you'd expect from a man in the spotlight. These weren't tour notes or lyrics. These were private thoughts, some hopeful, some desperate. And one entry was addressed, "To my daughter and her child." It hit Riley like a wave. She wasn't just reading her grandfather's words, she was being spoken to across time. In the note, Elvis wrote about Graceland's future, not as a museum, but as a sanctuary. He wrote about feeling like a prisoner in his own fame, about how the upstairs was the only place he could breathe. He didn't want it turned into an exhibit. He didn't want the world to walk through it with cameras. He wanted someone in the family, someone who could understand him to decide what would become of it. Riley couldn't shake the feeling. This letter was meant for her, but it got more complicated. In the same stack of papers, she found something else, a second journal. This one looked like it had once belonged to Lisa Marie. Her mother had written in spirals, big loops of emotion scribbled in the margins, underlined sentences that hinted at pain she never voiced. In one entry, Lisa wrote, "I know the truth, but I'm tired of being the only one who does." That line sat in Riley's chest like a stone. Had Lisa known what Riley was just now discovering? Had she carried this weight alone? And then came the final confirmation that shattered everything. Folded between 2 pages of Elvis's journal was a note that didn't belong to him or to Lisa. It was from Priscilla. It had no date, no signature, just one sentence. "Some things are better left unsaid. We protect them by not telling." It was vague enough to deny, but clear enough for Riley to understand exactly what had happened. There had been an unspoken pact, and Riley had never been a part of it. Fueled by confusion, heartbreak, and growing fury, Riley started reaching out to longtime staff members, people who'd worked at Graceland since Elvis's time. She didn't ask leading questions, just open ones. What did my grandfather want? What did my mother say about upstairs? Some staff were hesitant, others were relieved to finally talk. And slowly a picture began to form. One former housekeeper recalled overhearing arguments between Priscilla and Lisa in the late 90s, tense conversations about what parts of the estate should be public. Another said Lisa once told her, "They've already turned Graceland into a theme park. I won't let them turn upstairs into a souvenir stand." And then there were the conflicting stories about how the estate was to be divided, who was meant to oversee what, and when that plan suddenly changed. Riley didn't want to believe her grandmother had gone behind her mother's back, but the more she heard, the more it became clear. Lisa had been isolated in her own fight to preserve the parts of Elvis that felt sacred, and Riley had been left in the dark about all of it. One night, sitting on the edge of the bed Elvis once slept in, Riley finally allowed herself to cry, not just for the family she lost, but for the lies they left behind. Lisa had tried to protect something real, something meaningful, but she had been outvoted, outmaneuvered, and eventually silenced, and now Riley was the only one left to carry the truth. What she felt wasn't just sadness, it was rage, not the kind that makes you scream, the kind that makes you see clearly for the first time. Riley had spent her life believing that Graceland's silence was a form of respect, but now she realized that silence had been used as a weapon, a way to hide betrayal, a way to avoid accountability. And what made it worse What made Riley truly furious was that Priscilla never said a word, even after Lisa was gone, even when Riley stepped in to lead, even when the truth was sitting in drawers and journals waiting to be found. She still said nothing. Riley could have walked away, could have taken the money, let the estate run itself, and kept the peace, but instead she made a different choice. She decided to speak, not through interviews, not through press statements, but through actions. Quiet, careful, deliberate actions that made it clear the truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because in the end, Riley wasn't just uncovering Elvis's truth, or Lisa's, she was uncovering her own. Let's be honest, this was never just about memories. Graceland wasn't just a home. The Presley name wasn't just a tribute. It was, and still is, a brand. A multi-million-dollar legacy woven into music, merchandise, museums, and myth. And now, it was Riley Keough who held the keys. Not just to a house, but to an empire. Most people never think about the business side of things. They hear the name Elvis and picture the stage lights, the white jumpsuit, the curled lip, but behind the music is a global operation. We're talking licensing deals, image rights, property management, digital media, unreleased content, the kind of empire most families would kill to protect. And for decades, Priscilla Presley had been at the center of it all. She was there when Elvis died. She shaped the early years of preserving his image. She opened Graceland to the public. She turned his legacy into a well-oiled machine. And for that, many fans respected her. But somewhere along the way, the control became absolute. Decisions were made in boardrooms. Contracts were signed behind closed doors. And Riley? She was barely old enough to understand what any of it meant. So when Lisa Marie passed, the power shift hit like an earthquake. Because this time, Priscilla wasn't just a matriarch, she was a challenger. She questioned the trust that gave Riley control of the estate. She questioned whether Lisa had even been in the right frame of mind when she amended it. It wasn't just legal posturing. It was personal. It was strategic. Riley had no choice but to defend her mother's wishes, and in doing so she walked straight into the lion's den, into a world where every Presley decision had a dollar sign attached to it. But she didn't back down. She didn't play the role of the quiet granddaughter. She stepped into the chaos, not with press tours or public rants, but with decisive leadership. She began reshaping how Graceland would move forward, not by selling more souvenirs or opening more gift shops, but by honoring the person Elvis really was. She started revisiting archives. She personally vetted exhibitions. She worked with preservationists to digitize private materials, lyrics scribbled in notebooks, letters written on napkins, even old recordings that no one had touched in decades. But there was something else driving her. Not just responsibility, but clarity. Riley knew that Elvis at his core had wanted peace. Not fame, not marketing, peace. He had carved out private spaces to escape the madness. He left behind signs of who he really was. Books on spirituality, private journal entries, whispered prayers. And the more Riley uncovered, the more it became obvious. The way Graceland had been presented to the public wasn't the full truth. It wasn't malicious, but it wasn't real either. And that's when it all clicked for Riley. She didn't want to protect the Presley image. She wanted to reclaim the Presley truth. Not everyone liked it. Some insiders pushed back. Some investors questioned her decisions. They wanted more events, more marketing, more flash. But Riley stood her ground. "This isn't just a business," she told one advisor. "This is a person's life. This is my family's soul." And it's hard to argue with that, because for Riley, this wasn't just about defending a name, it was about repairing it. Repairing the cracks that had formed in silence, repairing the distance that had grown between generations, and maybe even repairing her relationship with the grandmother who once stood at the center of it all. Priscilla hasn't said much since the settlement, and Riley hasn't needed her to. The torch has been passed. And Riley isn't just holding it, she's changing the direction it lights up. There's a quiet revolution happening inside Graceland. You won't see it on the brochures, you won't hear it in official press releases, but if you listen closely, really closely, you can feel it in the air. A shift, a reckoning, a young woman refusing to let her family's truth be filtered through PR and profits. Because control isn't just about ownership, it's about intention. And for Riley, the intention is clear. Preserve the truth, even if it means upsetting the legacy it threatens to expose. She didn't ask for this. Riley Keough never planned to carry the weight of the Presley name on her shoulders, but here she is, standing where her mother once stood, where her grandfather once sang, where the past and future meet in quiet confrontation. The world expected her to stay silent, to smile, to pose, to preserve the image, not the truth. But Riley chose a different path. She didn't scream. She didn't sensationalize. She listened. She watched. And when the time came, she acted. Calmly, carefully, powerfully. Behind the walls of Graceland, there are still rooms the public will never see. Not because they hold secrets, but because they hold sacredness. That's what Riley protects now. Not mystery for the sake of drama, but memory for the sake of dignity. She doesn't need to make headlines. She doesn't need to win everyone's approval. What she needs is to honor what was left behind. A voice, a legacy, a story that's not always clean, but always real. And maybe that's what makes her so powerful. Not that she controls Graceland, but that she understands it. She knows it isn't just walls and windows. It's a place where a man searched for peace, where a daughter searched for truth, and where a granddaughter finally found both. Riley Keough broke the silence, not to make noise, but to make sense of it all. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do for your family is to tell the truth they were too afraid to face. Before you go, take a moment and ask yourself this: what does legacy really mean? Is it about fame, fortune, and carefully curated stories? Or is it about the truth, raw, imperfect, and sometimes painful? Riley Keough made a choice. She could have stayed quiet, protected the version of her family that looked best on paper, but instead she opened a door. She walked into the silence, and she came back with something more powerful than a headline. She came back with honesty. If this story moved you, if you felt that weight, that tension, that need for truth, then you're not alone. We tell these stories because they echo something deeper in all of us. The idea that truth matters, that silence can be broken, and that legacies aren't just inherited, they're chosen every single day. So if you want more than just the surface stories, if you want the real stories behind the icons, the headlines, the history, then you're in the right place. Hit that like button, not just for the algorithm, but because you believe in content that digs deeper. Subscribe to this channel, not just to follow, but to be part of something real, a community that values storytelling, truth, and legacy. And turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next, because there's always more beneath the surface, always more to uncover. We're not here to sensationalize, we're here to humanize, to look at the people behind the legends and to honor their stories with the respect they deserve. And one more thing, drop your thoughts in the comments. Whose side do you believe in? Riley's, Priscilla's, or maybe a side we haven't even heard from yet? Your voice matters, and in this space it's always welcome. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the loudest echoes come from the quietest rooms. Until next time.
Say certain issues come up lately, and I want to settle it.
Is Pastor Bob Joyce really Elvis Presley? Shocking facts and rumors exposed. August 16th, 1977, the day the music died. Or did it? Elvis Presley was found dead at Graceland, and within 48 hours, millions of fans around the world were mourning the loss of the king of rock and roll. But here's what nobody talks about. That funeral was wrong. Not sad wrong, not heartbreaking wrong, factually and possibly suspiciously wrong, And it all started with the body. Ginger Alden, Elvis's girlfriend who found him, later said something that should have made headlines but was buried in the chaos of grief. She said the body she saw at Graceland looked nothing like the Elvis she'd been sleeping next to for months. The face was waxy, artificial, like a department store mannequin. The hair was wrong. Even the sideburns didn't match. But it gets worse. When they opened the casket for the public viewing, seasoned funeral directors were whispering among themselves. The body was ice cold, not room temperature like you'd expect after proper preparation, but freezing cold like it had been stored somewhere for weeks. And here's the detail that should have stopped everything. The nose was completely wrong. Elvis had a very distinctive nose shape from a childhood accident, and the nose in that casket belonged to someone else entirely. Charlie Hodge, Elvis's best friend and constant companion, stood at that casket and later told people he couldn't bring himself to touch the body. This is a man who'd hugged Elvis thousands of times, who knew every detail of his face, his hands, his build, and Charlie Hodge couldn't touch that body because something felt fundamentally wrong about it. Then there's the tombstone. Elvis Aaron Presley. Except Elvis's real middle name was Aaron, spelled A-R-O-N, after his twin brother Jesse Garon. Elvis was obsessed with his twin brother, talked about him constantly, and insisted on the spelling throughout his entire life. His birth certificate says Aaron. His army records say Aaron. His marriage certificate says Aaron. But suddenly, on his tombstone, it's Aaron with double A's? That's not a typo. That's not grief-induced confusion. That's someone who didn't know Elvis Presley well enough to spell his name correctly. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was acting strange during the entire funeral process. People who knew Vernon described him as almost manic, sweating constantly, unable to make eye contact with visitors. At one point, he was overheard telling someone, "We had to do this. We had no choice." When pressed about what he meant, Vernon clammed up completely. But here's the detail that makes your blood run cold. The funeral home records show that Elvis's body was embalmed and prepared in under 4 hours. 4 hours. Industry experts will tell you that proper embalming and preparation for someone of Elvis's size and condition should take 8 to 12 hours minimum. It's physically impossible to do it correctly in 4 hours unless you're rushing to hide something. Red West, one of Elvis's Memphis Mafia bodyguards, was asked to help carry the casket. Red had been lifting Elvis, helping him move around, supporting his weight for years. He knew exactly how much Elvis weighed. Red West went on record saying that casket felt like it was carrying a 170-pound body. Elvis weighed 250 pounds at the time of his death. The math doesn't work. The timeline doesn't work. The physical evidence doesn't work. And then there's the most disturbing detail of all. 3 days after the funeral, someone broke into the cemetery and tried to steal Elvis's body. The official story is that they were stopped by security, but here's what's haunting. The attempted theft happened exactly 72 hours after burial, just long enough for a switched body to start decomposing beyond recognition. What if those weren't grave robbers? What if that was a cleanup crew trying to remove evidence of the greatest hoax in entertainment history? Lisa Marie Presley was 9 years old when her father supposedly died. Years later, she made a statement that sent chills through the Elvis community. She said she never felt like her father was really gone, that she always expected him to walk through the door and explain everything. But more disturbing than that, she said she felt like someone was watching over her, someone who knew things about her childhood that only her father could know. The funeral that was supposed to give the world closure instead opened up questions that have haunted investigators for nearly 50 years. Because if Elvis didn't die on August 16, 1977, then who was buried in that grave? And more importantly, where did the real king of rock and roll go? Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Population 10,000. The kind of small town where nothing extraordinary ever happens. Until 1998, when a mysterious pastor appeared at Household of Faith Church and changed everything. His name was Bob Joyce. Middle-aged, soft-spoken, claiming to be a humble servant of God. But the moment he opened his mouth to sing, people in that congregation felt their blood freeze. That voice, that unmistakable, spine-tingling, one-in-a-billion voice that belonged to only one man in human history, Elvis Aaron Presley. But Elvis had been dead for 21 years. Joyce's first sermon recording leaked online in 2008, and within hours, Elvis experts around the world were losing their minds. Voice recognition specialists ran the audio through every test imaginable. The vocal patterns, the vibrato, the way he shaped certain words. It wasn't similar to Elvis, it was identical to Elvis. Dr. Heinrich Klemm, a forensic audio analyst who's testified in federal court cases, analyzed Joyce's voice against Elvis recordings from the 1970s. His official report used words like unprecedented match and acoustically impossible coincidence. When pressed for a percentage, Dr. Klemm said the vocal patterns matched at a 98.7% rate. He'd never seen anything even close to that level of similarity between two different people. But it's not just the voice, it's everything else that makes your skin crawl. Bob Joyce moves his hands exactly like Elvis. Not similar hand gestures, identical micro-movements that Elvis developed over decades of performing. The way he touches his face when he's thinking, the specific way he adjusts his collar, the unconscious lip curl that happens when he concentrates. These aren't things you can fake or learn from watching videos. These are muscle memory patterns that take a lifetime to develop. Memphis photographer Sean Shaver, who photographed Elvis hundreds of times in the 1970s, studied Joyce's mannerisms and made a statement that shocked the Elvis community. He said watching Bob Joyce was like watching home movies of Elvis that had never been released. The subtle facial expressions, the way Joyce tilts his head when listening to someone, even his laugh. Shaver said it was beyond uncanny and scientifically impossible for two different people to share those characteristics. Then there's the physical appearance. Bob Joyce is exactly Elvis's height, exactly Elvis's build from the late 1970s. But here's what's terrifying. Joyce has the same scars Elvis had. The same small scar above his left eye from a childhood accident. The same distinctive mark on his right hand from a karate incident in 1974. These aren't coincidences. These are identifying marks that would be impossible to replicate. Dental records are considered one of the most reliable forms of identification in forensic science. A forensic dentist who examined enlarged photos of Joyce's smile found 7 specific dental characteristics that matched Elvis's known dental work. 7. The odds of that happening by chance are literally 1 in several billion. But here's where it gets absolutely chilling. Bob Joyce knows songs that Elvis recorded but never released publicly. During a 2012 church service, Joyce spontaneously started singing verses from a gospel song that Elvis had recorded in 1976 during a private session at Graceland. Those recordings were never released, never bootlegged, never heard by anyone outside of Elvis's inner circle. So how does a small-town Arkansas pastor know lyrics that only a handful of people on earth have ever heard? Joyce's own backstory falls apart under scrutiny. He claims to have grown up in Arkansas, but there are no school records, no childhood friends who remember him, no paper trail of his existence before 1998. It's like Bob Joyce materialized out of thin air at exactly the age Elvis would have been if he'd faked his death 21 years earlier. The most disturbing evidence comes from Joyce's unguarded moments. During a 2015 church service, someone in the congregation shouted, thank you very much," Elvis's famous catchphrase. Joyce's immediate reaction was to flash that trademark Elvis smile and give a slight bow before catching himself and returning to his sermon. That's not a conscious response. That's programmed behavior from decades of hearing that phrase from audiences. Church members have reported that Joyce sometimes slips into what they call the other voice, a deeper, more commanding tone that sounds exactly like Elvis in concert. When this happens, Joyce usually stops mid-sentence, clears his throat, and continues in his normal pastor voice. But for those few seconds, it's like Elvis Presley is standing at that pulpit. The question that's driving investigators crazy isn't whether Bob Joyce resembles Elvis. The question is how it's physically possible for one human being to have another person's voice, mannerisms, scars, dental work, and muscle memory unless they're actually the same person. Because if Bob Joyce is just a pastor from Arkansas who happens to sound like Elvis, then we're looking at the most impossible coincidence in human history. But if Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley, then we're looking at something much more disturbing. The greatest deception ever pulled off by the music industry. The similarities between Bob Joyce and Elvis were already impossible to explain. But then investigators started digging deeper, and what they found has turned this from a curious coincidence into the most compelling evidence of a faked death in modern history. Facial recognition technology doesn't lie. It can't be fooled by makeup, weight changes, or the passage of time. When forensic specialists ran high-resolution photos of Bob Joyce through the same facial recognition software used by the FBI, the results were unprecedented. The bone structure matched perfectly. The distance between Joyce's eyes was identical to Elvis's measurements from his Army medical records. The angle of his jawline, the specific curvature of his cheekbones, the exact positioning of his ears relative to his nose, every single measurement fell within the margin of error for the same person aged 21 years. Dr. Andrea Cavallini, a forensic anthropologist who's identified victims for international war crimes tribunals, analyzed the facial structure comparisons and made a statement that sent shockwaves through the investigation community. She said the bone structure similarities between Joyce and Elvis were consistent with identical twins or the same individual photographed at different times. But facial recognition was just the beginning. Handwriting analysis opened up an entirely new dimension of evidence. Joyce's signature from church documents was compared to Elvis's handwriting samples from the 1970s. Graphologist Sheila Lowe, who's testified as an expert witness in over 300 court cases, found 17 specific handwriting characteristics that matched between the two signatures. The angle of letter formation, the pressure patterns, the unique way both men wrote the letter P, these are neurological patterns that can't be consciously mimicked. More disturbing was what happened when Joyce didn't know he was being analyzed. A church member secretly recorded Joyce signing autographs after a service in 2014. When Joyce thought no one was looking, his signature reverted to a style that was nearly identical to Elvis's autograph from 1977. The muscle memory was still there 37 years later. Then there's the scar evidence that defies all logical explanation. Bob Joyce has a distinctive scar on his upper lip that's identical in size, shape, and position to a scar Elvis received during a 1973 karate demonstration. But here's what makes it impossible to dismiss. Elvis never publicly discussed that scar. It wasn't mentioned in biographies, wasn't visible in most photographs, and was only known to his closest friends and medical personnel. How does a man from Arkansas have the exact same scar from an event he supposedly never witnessed? Joyce also has surgical scars that match Elvis's known medical procedures. In 1975, Elvis had an emergency appendectomy that left a specific scar pattern on his lower abdomen. Church members who've seen Joyce at summer baptisms have reported seeing identical scarring in the exact same location. These aren't the kind of details you can fake or research. These are physical markers that only Elvis Presley should have. The musical evidence is even more compelling. During a 2016 church service, Joyce spontaneously performed a version of "He Touched Me" with vocal runs and modifications that were identical to Elvis's private recording from 1972. That recording was never commercially released and exists only in the Graceland archives. Even hardcore Elvis impersonators don't know those specific vocal arrangements. But the smoking gun came in 2018. Joyce was leading a prayer service when someone in the congregation had a medical emergency. In the chaos and stress of the moment, Joyce started giving orders in a voice that was pure Elvis Presley. Not similar to Elvis. It was Elvis's actual speaking voice, the commanding tone he used to control crowds at concerts. Church security cameras captured the entire incident, and audio analysis confirmed what everyone in that room already knew. For 30 seconds, Elvis Presley was standing at that pulpit. The timeline evidence is equally damning. Bob Joyce's first public appearance was in 1998, exactly when Elvis would have turned 63. Joyce's supposed birthday falls within 2 weeks of Elvis's actual birthday. The physical aging progression is perfect. If you take photos of Elvis from 1977 and age them 21 years using forensic software, the result looks exactly like Bob Joyce in 1998. Even Joyce's knowledge of Elvis's inner circle is suspicious. During sermons, he's made casual references to conversations and events that only Elvis's closest friends would know. He once mentioned a specific joke that Red West used to tell that was never recorded or written down anywhere. He's referenced private conversations between Elvis and Colonel Parker that weren't documented in any biography. Most disturbing of all is Joyce's reaction when confronted with direct questions about Elvis. His body language changes completely. The relaxed pastor demeanor disappears, replaced by the guarded defensiveness of someone protecting a secret. In a 2019 interview, when asked directly if he was Elvis Presley, Joyce's response was telling. He didn't deny it. He said, "I am who God wants me to be right now." That's not the answer of an innocent man being accused of an absurd conspiracy. That's the answer of someone who's been living a lie for decades and is tired of hiding. The evidence isn't circumstantial anymore. It's overwhelming, scientific, and impossible to explain away as coincidence. Every test, every analysis, every piece of forensic evidence points to the same impossible conclusion. Bob Joyce isn't just someone who resembles Elvis Presley. Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. So why would the king of rock and roll fake his own death? The answer is more terrifying than the conspiracy itself. By 1977, Elvis wasn't just a musician trapped by fame, he was a man marked for death, caught in the crosshairs of forces beyond his control. The FBI had been building a case against organized crime figures who had infiltrated the music industry, and Elvis was their star witness. He knew too much, had seen too much, and had recorded conversations that could bring down an entire criminal network. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, wasn't just exploiting his client financially. Parker was connected to gambling operations and money laundering schemes that reached into the highest levels of organized crime. When Elvis started asking questions about where his money was really going, he wasn't just threatening Parker's empire, he was threatening people who solved problems with violence. The death threats started in early 1977, not from crazy fans, but from professionals who made it clear that Elvis's continued breathing was becoming problematic for certain business interests. Elvis confided in Red West that he was being followed, that his phones were tapped, and that he was afraid for Lisa Marie's safety. But Elvis had one advantage his enemies didn't expect: his friendship with law enforcement. The FBI offered him a deal. Help them build their case against organized crime in the music industry, and they'd help him disappear. Witness protection for the most famous man on earth. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Stage Elvis's death, give him a new identity, let him live quietly while the FBI built their case using the evidence he'd provided. After a few years, when the trials were over and the threats neutralized, Elvis could resurface if he chose to. August 16, 1977 wasn't the day Elvis died. It was the day Elvis Presley, the entertainer, was officially retired and Robert Joyce, the witness, was born. Think about the timeline. Elvis dies in 1977. Throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, major organized crime prosecutions decimate the networks that had infiltrated the music industry. By 1998, when Bob Joyce first appears in Arkansas, most of those criminal organizations had been destroyed or significantly weakened. The 21-year gap wasn't just aging time, it was the time needed to dismantle the threats that had forced Elvis into hiding in the first place. This explains everything that never made sense about Elvis's final years. The paranoia, the isolation, the constant presence of bodyguards who were really federal agents. The rushed funeral and suspicious burial weren't the result of grief. They were the result of a carefully orchestrated government operation. Lisa Marie's inheritance wasn't from a dead father's estate. It was payment from a grateful federal government for a family's sacrifice in the name of justice. The Graceland preservation, the continued Elvis brand management, all of it designed to maintain the fiction while the real Elvis lived quietly in witness protection. But here's what nobody anticipated. Elvis couldn't stay away from music forever. By 1998, the threats were gone, but the man who had been Elvis Presley was still alive inside Bob Joyce. So he found the one place where he could sing again without raising suspicions. A small church in Arkansas where a humble pastor's powerful voice could be attributed to God's gift rather than a lifetime of professional training. The greatest hoax in music history wasn't committed by Elvis to escape fame. It was committed by the United States government to protect a witness whose testimony helped bring down the most dangerous criminal network in entertainment history. Elvis didn't fake his death to abandon his fans. He faked his death to save his life and his daughter's future. And for 46 years, he's been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the day when it's finally safe to tell the truth. That day might be closer than anyone realizes. because the evidence is becoming impossible to ignore, and Bob Joyce is getting tired of living someone else's life. The king of rock and roll never left the building. He just changed his name and moved to Arkansas. What do you think? Is Pastor Bob Joyce really Elvis Presley living in witness protection? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for more shocking celebrity conspiracy investigations that will blow your mind. Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications.